We're going to look at C++ arrays today. It's a build-up of the previous course, okay? Today's lesson is just going to be based on arrays, the conditional statements, the for loops, the things that we learned in the last lesson. This one is a build-up. It helps understand how we can access multiple elements or groups of data. Okay. That's what today's lesson is going to be all about. We are remaining with 1 minute. Let's see if someone else will join. Then we can kick off. Please be free to ask questions where you're not clear while I'm explaining, because sometimes I can be quick. So when you don't understand the concept, be sure to ask, and I'll try my level best to explain. Okay, I think we should start, because I'm also using free version of Zoom, so after 40 minutes, it should be done. That is 18:30. I think I started the meeting at 17:50, so 18:30 it should be done. Okay, so today we're looking at C++ arrays. Like, what are arrays anyway? So arrays are more like a way of keeping a set of information about similar data type, okay? So if you want to declare that kind of array, or maybe that kind of an element in C++, first you are going to define the type of the data that you want to store. For instance, we want to store string types, okay? We first define the type of variable that we're going to use. So we can say string, and then we want to keep names of cars. You can either give your variable cars or whatsoever name that you want to give your variable, and then square brackets and the number of elements that you want to store, or the number of elements that you want to store in your array. Okay, that is how you declare an array. It is just a way of storing multiple values in a single variable. Okay, instead of you declaring a number of variables of the same type, maybe you want to declare variables that define cars. Instead of you declaring, say, string BMW, string Benz, string Ford, you are just going to declare one variable and make that variable as an array. How do we do that? We say, if we want to store integers, we define the type, then can. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, like I said, if you want to store integers, for instance, you define your data type, say integers, using this keyword int. Int, my number, or my num, square brackets, you define the number of elements that you want to include in the array, then open curly brace, and then the elements that are separated by commas. Okay, it is a separated comma separated list. Okay, then each statement in C++ ends with a semicolon. Make sure to include the semicolon at the end. Then you have declared an array. Okay, now what do we want to do with the array anyway? Okay, data that we store in programming or in a database, we usually want to use it somewhere. But if we store data, as I said, like this, how do we access it separately? How do we access it individually? Okay, so arrays, any type of array, a list, you get to learn the data types, the object data types later in the course. But what I can explain here is that when you have a list of elements like this, when you have a set of elements, we use indices or index number to access the data type. And arrays use the zero reference numbering, meaning they start from zero to the index numbers start from zero. So the first element in the array can be indexed with the value 0. So you say 0, 1, 2. Okay. So you access an array element by referring to the index number inside square brackets. Okay. So for instance, the array cars that we have here has got 4 elements in it. So if we want to if we want to get the first value, Volvo, we want to use this value in, say we want to get this value from the array. What we do is, because the index numbers start from 0, we say cout, you get the name of the variable cars, open square bracket, then 0, and close, then semicolon. What this does is it references the value Volvo from the cars array, because it is the first element in the array. Okay, and thus the output of this code here is Volvo. Okay, for example, let's do this. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So for instance, we want to, when this code, I just copied it from our notes, but I'm sure you're able to understand the syntax. Here we've got the main function, and then we're using the header line string.h, okay, so that we are able to use the string element, okay? And then when we say cout cars with the index 0 inside the square bracket, what we expect is a Volvo, okay? So when we run our program here, when we run our program, let's see what we get. Okay, are you able to see the screen that I'm sharing? What's this? The IDE, where I pasted the what's this? The code that I copied from the previous screen.
Yes.
Okay, so like we anticipated to say, when we reference the index 0, we're expecting to get Volvo as the result. Of course, when you look at the terminal, the value, the output from the Hello World program is Volvo. That is the reason why Volvo is being printed out here. So in the event that you want to print out Ford, we said C++ arrays use the 0 in reference index. So we start from 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we want to print out Ford, for instance, we should use 2 instead of 3 because we are starting from 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we change our code and put 2 in here, we expect Ford to be printed on the screen. Okay. Let's just give the compiler some time. Okay. So as we can see from the screen here, we're able to see that Ford has been printed out based on the index that you have referenced in the variable cars. Okay. And that is how you access your values from the array. Okay. So let me go back to this screen so that we can continue. There's a note here that I put just to remind you guys to say arrays indexes start with 0. If you ever use 1 as your first index, then you are more likely to get errors because the very moment you try to access the last element, you might be accessing an element which is not in the array. So usually the compiler is going to be getting an error. So you need to bear in mind that every time you're accessing an array, you start from 0 as your index. Okay, so how do we change values? Sometimes you find that you store a value in a database or in any type of data structure that you are using. You want to change a value. Or maybe you're registering someone for voting, okay? And then they tell you no, I'm Brighton Zoo. Later on, they come back, no, I made a mistake. I am Brighton Band. How do you change that? So, for instance, you're using an array. How do we change that? We mentioned earlier to say we access values from an array using the index numbers. It is the same way that we access those values, change the values, and save them in the array. Okay. So for instance, we want to change the first element from Volvo to Opel. So what you do is first you access the value. How do you access Volvo? You reference it with 0, and that is the reason why here it has 0. The first element in the array cars should be equal to Opel. What this does, it just changes the value from the value of Volvo to Opel. Okay. And when we try to print out this, the first element, what we get from the response of this line is Opel instead of Volvo because we changed the value. Okay. Okay, so now there are times where when you want to know everything or in your data structure, you want to get a list of students, a list of maybe authorities. You want to know the people who are registered for a certain something. You can't access them in index by index manually. And sometimes the list can grow exponentially. You don't know how much that list is going to grow. So how do we manage to access such an enormous amount of data? We use loops, okay? Loops help us access multiple or huge amounts of data, okay? So for instance, you want to know everything that is in the, or you want to print out everything that is in this array, which has got 5 elements. Since this array, we have already been told that it has got 5 elements inside, okay? So what do? We can use a for loop, okay? A for loop, which is going to iterate the index numbers, okay? It's going to increment the index numbers based on what it has accessed and what it has not accessed. So we said earlier to say the index numbers of an array start from 0, okay? This is where it comes in handy, because when you start from 1, for instance, say we say I is equal to 1 here, okay? This I here is just is representing the index, because we are using it inside the index. When you look at the cars variable, I is being represented as the index in here. So the for loop, the first time this for loop runs, I is going to be equal to 0, meaning that we are referencing the first element. We're accessing the first element. After this is done, we get the second element, because I is going to be incremented. In the previous lessons, though the previous lessons were not recorded, so we explained how the for loop works, okay? So we first initialize the index that we're going to use, and then the condition that is going to allow this for loop to run, and then we increment or decrement depending on the operation that we want to do. So since we have 5 elements, meaning that the index numbers will end at 4, not 5, because we start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? If you want to use I as 1 here, meaning that you need to say, you need to end at 6 here, or you say 5 minus 1, okay? That's how you can access everything using 1. But that would actually give you errors, you know. So it is best you use the 0 index, okay? Do you have any questions up to this point? Are there any questions? Okay, let me continue. So in the same vein, where are we? Okay, so in the same vein, if you want to access integer numbers, you can access them using a for loop, okay? The for loop, the index is going to be increasing because we're using the increment operator here. So the first time the for loop runs, the I here is going to be equal to 0. The second time it's going to be equal to 1. The third time is going to be equal to 2, 3, 4. And because the condition here states that I is less than 5, meaning that this for loop can only work if I is less than 5. The very moment I becomes equal to 5 or greater than 5, then it won't work. We just need numbers which are less than 5, and I is starting from 0, okay? So meaning when we run this code, what we expect is 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, okay? So instead of you writing all this long code here, there is what we call the for each loop. The for each loop is a short form of writing a for loop. So instead of you writing all these conditions whereby you can actually create errors, you can use the for each loop. What the for each loop does, the syntax of the for each loop is first you state your type, the type of the elements that you're storing, the variable name, and the array name. So the type, the type here is your index, okay? Is your index, okay? And the index is going to help you access your elements in the array, okay? So for instance, you say int numbers 5. This 5 inside the square bracket just gives us the size of the array, okay? So we have 4 int I, my numbers, okay? Then when we say int I, my numbers, this, the output of this here is going to be the index, but not the values inside not the values inside your array, okay? If you want to get what is inside your array, you use my numbers and I inside the square brackets, okay? Okay, so I've been told that we're running out of time. Let me just check how much time we're remaining with. Then, okay, we're remaining with 9 minutes. We can still do something. Then we can continue after, you can rejoin after it cancels. I'll connect again to explain the remaining parts, okay? So in C++, you don't have to specify the size of the array, okay? The reason why we don't have to specify the size of the array, we don't know the amount of data that we're going to keep. So if you specify at 5, then you are probably going to get errors, okay? You don't have to specify the size of the array, but rather just leave it open because you don't know the amount of data that you're going to keep, okay? The compiler is smart enough to determine the size of the array based on the number of inserted values. So when you leave the array open, it is called the dynamic array because every time you can add, change, but when you specify the number, you can't add more than that number, okay? That is the reason why it is important to leave your array open as a dynamic array, okay? So this example here, it's a correct syntax of declaring arrays, but it's just not a good practice because you don't know what is what the size of the array that you're going to be dealing with. Okay, so say omitting elements on declaration. Okay, it is also possible to declare an array without specifying the elements on declaration and add them later. Like I said, you can create a data structure, but without putting information in it. Now, how do you specify the data? So, like earlier we said, if we want to access values in an array, we use index numbers. So to do that, we use index numbers to add the first, the second, depending on the index number that you have mentioned in your array square brackets, then that's where that element will be placed. But if you place it, you say you have added 2, then you say 3, you run into an error, okay? And then array size. There are times when you want to know the size of the array. How do we get the size of the array, okay? So to get the size of an array, you can use the size of operator, okay? This is a function which is found in the array structure or object, size of. This one is going to tell you the size of the array, okay? So for instance, we're using integers here, pay attention. We're using integers. My number's 5. This is an array of 5 elements, okay? 5 elements, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, okay? So when you say cout size of my numbers, the result that we get is 20. But why? We're expecting to get, maybe say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're expecting to get 5 to say this array is of size 5 because it has got 5 elements. The reason why we are getting 20, this function size of gives you the addition of the bytes that are spared for each element that you have put. Earlier, we learned to say the integer type stores or preserves 4 bytes for each integer number, okay? So we have got 5 integers. Thus, the reason we're getting 20, this number is in bytes. So it's simply telling us the array is of size 20 bytes because it is keeping 5 integers, okay? So if we want to get the size now, the number of elements in the array, okay, or the length, what we do is first we use the size of operator. We're going to get our 20. And then, because we know each data type, to say each data type is of this size, for instance, integers are of 4 bytes. What we do is we get 20 and the size of int, which is 4, the size of function retains the integers are 4 bytes. So this operation or this function retains the size of the preserved variable value, okay? So integers preserve 4 bytes. So when we get number of, we know that number of the total bytes in this array is 20. And then integer is 4. So when you say 20 divided by 4, we get the length of the array, okay, which is 5. That is how you are able to get your size of the array or the length of the array. Okay. So instead of using the conditions, sometimes you can access elements that are not specified in the array. You find that you get index out of bound error while you are running your code. So it is best you use size of to calculate the size of your array. And then even if your array is dynamic, you'll be able to run your program correctly. Okay. So instead of writing, for instance, int numbers, my numbers 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and these conditions here, you would prefer calculating the size of the array. So to get a 5, we remember what we did. This gives us 20, and over this gives us 4. And that is the reason why this syntax is correct. And this is the best approach to use. It might look complex, but for the sake of having correct output every time you run your program, it is better you follow this approach, okay? Or you can also use the for each loop, which just gets the integer, the index and the array. And this will be able to loop through your array and tell you how long that array is, okay? So let's just rejoin because this other topic is going to be long as well, and we can't explain everything in 1 minute. Are there any questions before we cut? Hello?
No question from me.
Okay, thank you. Let me reconnect because it's done now.